Urgent, Putin has ordered the bombing of Belgorod. Russians are screaming as a fireworks display from the so-called Second Army of the World explodes right above their heads. At the same time, Putin's plane crashed in Crimea with nearly 30 military personnel killed. The Russian army's elite have never been mourned like this before. Combat wings can't take it anymore. Another Su-34 fighter jet has taken its final flight. Meanwhile, the irritated dictator has delivered a new ultimatum to Zelensky. Moscow has finally gotten its way. Peskov is once again caught between two fires. Then, shock. Fedorov has snatched victory for Kyiv. Ukraine, together with the EU, is launching a true defense revolution. Now our strength is invincible. And all of this has happened right now. Greetings, I'm Renata Aslanova and we're getting started. Another failure on the record of the world's Second Army. Belgorod region is under a hail of fire. From their own side, an aerial bomb fell right on the heads of the Russians. Lately, this keeps happening again and again. There's no point in hiding it anymore, at all.
A Russian bomber dropped an aerial bomb near a highway in the Kursk region.
Russians are panicking. There are no safe places. There are practically none left. The army, as always, missed its target. To bypass Ukrainian air defense, they started installing special UMPK systems on old Soviet FAB bombs. But instead, they got an epic fireworks show on their own territory. According to
Astra's data, in 2026, at least 14 Russian high-explosive bombs have already fallen on Russia and the occupied Ukrainian territories. Aerial bombs.
The most interesting thing is that the Russian authorities are trying to hide such facts. And when? Among those affected by the fall of Russian aerial bombs are civilians, and it is reported that the alleged cause is attacks by the Ukrainian armed forces. Nevertheless, the Russian military themselves, obviously tired of the constant lies, are revealing the shocking truth. In
general, we believe that the abnormal detonations are caused by the insufficient reliability of the universal planning and correction modules with which the FABs are equipped. One of the working hypotheses regarding the specific mechanism of this abnormal detonation was insufficient. The quality of the pyrotechnic cartridges, which are supposed to deploy the wings, was insufficient. However, we do not rule out other causes, both of a mechanical nature and related to electronics, as well as design flaws and manufacturing defects.
As we can see, the Russians are doing just fine with the mission called self-destruction without any help from the Ukrainian armed forces. So we are keeping an eye on developments and waiting for updated statistics. Sensational news? Putin is in double mourning. In just one day, 2 aircraft were destroyed at once. The main military correspondents first donned mourning for the loss of the Su-34. They say the plane crashed while repelling a drone attack. The pilot likely died. The navigator survived. Ukrainian media, however, are more accurate. It could have been the loss of a fighter-bomber right during a combat mission.
Unfortunately, trouble never comes alone.
Now, near Kalim and Bangarnoma, they have started shedding tears over the crash of a military transport aircraft, an Antonov 26 in Crimea. It is known that 29 of Putin's soldiers died at once.
The An-26 was transporting personnel. Preliminary reports say there were 30 people on board.
Contact with the aircraft was lost during a routine flight over the peninsula. Later, it was determined that the plane crashed into a cliff. The Russian Ministry of Defense insists that neither missiles nor drones were involved in the crash.
There was no strike on the aircraft. The preliminary cause of the disaster is a technical malfunction, according to the agency.
An urgent new peace ultimatum. Putin has put forward yet another proposal. Ukraine must leave Donbass within 2 months. In exchange, the occupiers promised to put an end to the war. Vladimir Zelensky spoke about this.
The issue is that now there are new deadlines. They say that in 2 months they will seize eastern Ukraine, they will seize Donbass. And that's why there are 2 months to leave. And the war will be over. But if Ukraine does not leave, then Russia will seize Donbass, and then there will be different conditions.
The president noted that the Russians are well aware that seizing Donbass in 2 months is impossible for them. They will not be able to take Donbass. That is precisely why they resort to putting pressure on our partners. At the same time, the head of state emphasized that Ukraine is ready for compromise, for a ceasefire, right where we stand. But that is not enough for the enemy. In the Kremlin, they are once again exerting pressure through the United States. Putin's aide, Yuri Ushakov, stated that Washington should influence Kyiv to fulfill certain agreements following the Trump-Putin meeting in Anchorage. No one is saying exactly what those agreements are, but in Moscow they keep insisting on some sort of spirit of anchorage and hinting that Ukraine is interfering with their behind-the-scenes plans. Nevertheless, the Kremlin itself, as usual, backs down when it comes to making real decisions. The day before, Volodymyr Zelensky announced that Ukrainians are ready for a ceasefire, particularly during Easter. In response, Putin's press secretary Dmitry Peskov stated that Moscow did not see any clearly formulated initiatives.
As always, he spoke about the willingness and desire to agree to a truce. Any truce, even an Easter one. This is what President Zelensky was talking about.
Putin's jester also claims that the Russian occupiers are supposedly advancing on the front, so Ukraine needs any kind of truce, but must, I quote, make the appropriate decision so that we achieve peace, not just a ceasefire. In turn, Zelensky stated that Ukrainians, together with the Americans, will discuss how close the participants in the process are to trilateral agreements, or at least to holding such a meeting. It is extremely important. Mykhailo Fedorov announced a joint defense project with SES. New technologies, joint developments, and striking power that could change the rules of the game. Ukraine is ramping up its defense to the maximum, and this is only the beginning.
The focus is on expanding funding and launching joint projects in the fields of drones, air defense, and long-range capabilities. The priority is flexible financing. Ukraine must quickly allocate resources to critically important areas according to the war plan, the production of drones, counter-drone measures, and the development of deep strike capabilities.
Ukraine and EU are launching EDIP drones, air defense, and strike systems. This is heading to the battlefield. We are testing tech and scaling what works, drones, anti-drone gear, and tools to repel the enemy. Another 260 million euros will fund modernizing Ukraine's defense sector and its European defense integration. The number one highlight is anti-ballistic systems, including missiles for intercepting ballistic threats. Ukraine is seriously raising the stakes and changing the rules of the game on the front line. Krasnodar is on fire. Ukraine's retribution has reached Putin. The war has reached homes of Russians. Russia's rear is collapsing. No place in Russia is safe anymore. The dictator who started the invasion has personally opened the gates of hell for his own citizens. Panic in Russian cities? Why is this only the beginning? Watch. Russian territory is on the move again.
Some kind of sound, something flying. Well, where is something flying? Whoa. Damn, I set up the camera just in time. If it goes off there, you know, the explosion will be like a nuclear one. There will be a real mushroom cloud.
As usual, the Russian Ministry of Aggression reported bravely. Overnight, they shot down more than 100 Ukrainian drones in 9 Russian regions, as well as over the waters of the Sea of Azov and over temporarily occupied Crimea. How many were actually shot down is unknown, but the fact is some got through. That's a fact. Krasnodar in particular was hit. There, one of the drones crashed into a multi-story residential building. Local authorities reported 3 people injured. Rostov region was also awake all night. The head of the region reported that they were attacked by more than 60 drones. Taganrog was also hit. There, as a result of falling debris, residential buildings caught fire. And once again, Russian air defense is to blame for everything. Russian air defense was operating directly over residential buildings. Local residents filmed their supposed repelling of the attack. But in the Samara region, either the air defense didn't work or, as always, it turned out to be useless. As a result, residential buildings in Tolyatti were not damaged. The same can't be said for the Kuibyshev Azot chemical plant, which was already attacked on March 11th. The enterprise is among the 10 largest in Russia's nitrogen industry, and there, once again, something got through. There's more smoke behind the building over there. The daily strikes on Russian cities are forcing officials to make excuses to the Russian people. On federal channels, Kremlin loyalists keep insisting that Russian air defense is the best in the world. But now they've added a new talking point. It turns out these strikes are supposedly not scary and even good for Russians.
I state with full responsibility, we have the best air defense in the world, and our air defense is the best. No one else has anything like it at all. No one has it today. And the fact that sometimes a drone manages to reach quite deep inside, on the one hand, that's actually good, because we gain experience in repelling massive attacks. But
Even so-called military bloggers have stopped believing Russian officials. And after seeing how drones have been setting fire to the Ust-Luga port for several days now, they shared a frightening suspicion.
In light of all these events, there are only two guesses. If suddenly, when enemy nuclear missiles are launched at us, the air defense simply leaves the chat in the same way. A proper retaliatory strike might not even happen, since it could very well turn out that the actual state of the strategic missile forces is the same as that of all the other structures of the Russian Ministry of Defense. That is, they are limited exclusively to impressive reports. But we won't have time to find out about it. By
the way, about Ust-Luga, this oil port continues to be hit by Ukrainian drones. For almost a week now, things have been consistently tense there. And the president of Ukraine does not hide the fact that the attacks on Ust-Luga are a response to strikes on Ukrainian energy infrastructure. And official Kyiv is even ready to stop these responses. For this, it is enough for Moscow to stop its attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure.
we are not just delivering strikes. We are not just striking, we are responding. Why am I reminding you of this? Recently, after the global energy crisis, we have been receiving signals from some of our partners about how to reduce our responses against Russia's oil and energy sector. If Russia is ready to stop striking Ukrainian energy infrastructure, we will not respond. Against the
vast global energy production and distribution sector in its current state? Well, as long as the Kremlin hesitates, Russian territory will continue to experience activity and lose money. However, Ukrainian drones and missiles are unlikely to be upset if they have to keep working. It's begun. Europe has rebelled and Kaja Kallas humiliated the USA, looking them straight in the face. While Washington hesitates, Kyiv and Brussels are showing the whole world how the Kremlin should really be destroyed. The masks are off. European leaders are no longer going to remain silent. A scandal at the highest levels. Kaja Kallas delivered a slap to Marco Rubio. Watch for all the details.
The US and Europe have entered into a real confrontation over the war in Ukraine. At the G7 meeting, European diplomatic chief Kallas and US Secretary of State Rubio exchanged sharp statements. Kallas criticized the US for the fact that a year has passed and nothing has changed. When will their patience with Russia finally run out?
This is a typical Russian negotiation tactic, to demand what never belonged to them. And this is a trap we should not fall into. If we, together with the Americans, put pressure on Russia, we can end the war in Ukraine and establish a lasting, durable peace. We see that Russia is helping Iran with intelligence to carry out strikes and kill Americans, and also helps with drones, for attacks on neighboring countries and American military bases. If the Americans want to stop the war, they need to put pressure on the Russians so they can't help Iran.
Rubio replied that they've already done a lot, and if the Europeans know better, they can try it themselves. He essentially began to threaten to withdraw from the peace process.
I'm not here to please them. On a personal level, I get along well with them. But I'm more interested in the well-being of the people of the United States. They're the ones I work for. I don't work for France, Germany, Japan, or others, even though they're all wonderful people. We constantly receive requests for help in the war in Ukraine, and we have more resources than any other country in the world. But when the United States was in need, they didn't receive any help. Some European leaders said that the war in Iran was not their war. The war in Ukraine isn't our war either, but we still made a significant contribution.
Well, it's clear what Rubio is doing when he knows perfectly well Trump's position and knows that Trump doesn't want to put any pressure on Putin at all, and at the first opportunity rushes to call him and ask for help. Rubio has to make excuses. It's unpleasant for him, but he might think that the White House is worth the trouble. That's basically been his position over the past year.
In Russia, they immediately jumped in to agree and declared that the US is not putting enough pressure on Ukraine. And it's specifically the Ukrainians who are to blame for the fact that the war is still ongoing.
It also seems that the Americans could very well actually put real pressure and influence Kyiv. They got involved in regulation, in the process of regulation. Moreover, they voiced a number of quite interesting, I would even say useful, considerations and proposals, but so far they have not been implemented.
Rubio also had a conflict with the Ukrainian president. Zelensky stated that the Americans are demanding that Ukraine withdraw from Donbas in exchange for security guarantees.
If today in Russia there is an ultimatum that it will end the war only after the withdrawal of Ukrainian armed forces from the entire territory of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, and if this ultimatum is voiced and the American side says that after Russia ends the war, we will give you guarantees. Otherwise, we will not give you any guarantees. People may have different opinions about this, but all the signals throughout the entire negotiation process indicate, and this is not just my analysis, it is stated quite directly, that we will be able to receive security guarantees from the United States of America. Not before a ceasefire, not before the end of the war, but only after our troops withdraw from Donbas.
The US Secretary of State was outraged, claiming that the president of Ukraine was supposedly not telling the truth, and no one is putting pressure on anyone.
That's a lie, and I saw him say it, and it's a real shame that he said that because he knows it's not true. No one told him that. He was told the obvious. Security guarantees will not come into effect until the war is over, because otherwise you are getting involved in the war. He was told very clearly, and he should have understood, that security guarantees only take effect after the war ends. But this was not connected to him having to give up territory. I don't know why he says that. It's simply not true.
Ruby interprets it this way. As you know, we're not putting pressure on them because we're not directly telling them to withdraw their troops from the Donetsk region. We're simply conveying to them the Russian position. Then Zelensky might think that when the Americans link the end of hostilities to the Russian position, they're trying to oppose it. That's pressure, isn't it? In theory, the Americans shouldn't have shared this with the Ukrainians. Instead, they should have told the Russians they reject this position and would not work with it. Does that make sense?
At the same time, it should be noted that Europe is finally becoming an independent actor and is increasingly voicing objections to the US and helping Ukraine defend its interests. Shocking. A gasoline apocalypse in Russia. The Kremlin is frantically closing the borders. Exports are zero and gas stations are failing. The energy superpower is out of fuel. The truth is finally out. The Russian government is officially imposing a total embargo on gasoline exports. What awaits Russia next? Stay tuned. On the brink of collapse, Putin's Russia is getting closer to crisis. The Kremlin is officially imposing a complete ban on the export of automotive gasoline for all market participants. These are all the results of their work. The restrictions will take effect from April 1st and will last for at least 4 months.
By adopting this approach, the overall situation will become much calmer and more stable. The cost of living will become significantly more affordable, and it will be possible to establish much better conditions for long-term economic development.
This decision was made after an emergency meeting of representatives of the oil industry, where they officially confirmed a critical shortage of fuel within the country. The main goal of the restrictions was to protect domestic consumers and attempt to stop the rapid rise in prices at gas stations. In fact, the industry has admitted that it is unable to simultaneously fulfill export contracts and meet the needs of its own market under conditions of production shortages.
Before Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, the export of petroleum products, primarily gasoline, brought Russia $75 billion a year. Well, as we can clearly see, Russia has consistently implemented various bans on the export of gasoline and petroleum products lately. This is primarily because there is both a significant physical shortage of supply within their domestic market and a growing inability to fully export these goods due to extensive structural damage to Russia's very own logistical port facilities, which are specifically used to transport and distribute these essential fuel resources to international markets abroad.
The ban on gasoline exports followed a series of drone attacks on oil refineries, as a result of which at least 3 of them halted fuel production, including 2 just in the past week. Moreover, many plants are unable to resume operations due to sanctions on Western equipment.
The amount of gasoline in Russia, let's put it this way, has decreased and the ability to export has diminished. But Russia is not going to say that it can't export as much gasoline as before because Ukraine is carrying out strikes. In Russia, they generally try not to acknowledge such things. That's why officially they say that the ban on gasoline exports is being introduced because it is justified. There really is a gasoline shortage. So there you have it. We are exporting less because we have banned exports.
During 2025, the Ukrainian Defense Forces carried out more than 140 attacks on oil refineries and oil depots in Russia. According to Reuters calculations, about 40% of Russia's oil export capacity was shut down last week, which became the most serious disruption in the supply of black gold in the modern history of Putin's country.
This is indirect confirmation that the strikes being carried out by Ukraine's special services, by those who are carrying them out, are having an effect. The Russian authorities do not admit this in words, but in practice they are banning gasoline exports, which precisely indicates that there is damage and it is significant.
In other words, foreign currency revenues amounting to billions of dollars have come under threat, since gasoline exports are one of the key sources of budget income. Now, these strategic cash flows are effectively blocked due to the imposed embargo.
Russia is now earning less from the export of petroleum products, which, while not as lucrative as raw resources, still used to bring in money. By resources, I mean oil and gas, but petroleum products also used to generate revenue. So here too, there will obviously be losses. Well, $75 billion. That was before the full-scale war. But during the war, Russia was selling about 47 to 49, up to $50 billion a year in petroleum products. So there you have it, an approximate amount of lost revenue, if such a ban lasts until the end of the year.
The Kremlin is sacrificing the profits of oil giants to appease small businesses and the population, preventing a fuel crisis under martial law and amid attacks on infrastructure.
The pressure on business that the Russian authorities are applying could have a very negative effect when businesses simply start saying that they are shutting down. And this trend is also present in the Russian economy. And if businesses are shutting down, if there are fewer and fewer enterprises, the tax base shrinks, and that could be even worse for the budget. So here, this is called multiplying unfavorable scenarios, multiplying situations where you can't find a good answer and are constantly forced to choose between bad options.
A ban on gasoline exports was already introduced in Russia in August of last year, when Ukrainian drone attacks knocked out about 15% of refinery capacity, and it was lifted on January 31st. It is expected that if the situation with the restoration of oil refineries does not improve in the near future, the export ban could be extended beyond July 2026.
The economy cannot withstand this war, and Russia may increasingly lean toward the scenario of Germany in the First World War, when Berlin was never captured. There were no military actions on German territory, yet Germany capitulated, because there was no way to ensure a normal economic life in the country. Now, Russia is very close to this stage. The second question is when exactly it will reach this crisis state. There is already talk that it will happen this year, but closer to its end, or even in the middle.
With that, we conclude this episode. We will continue to closely follow the most relevant events to be the first to tell you about them. Don't forget to subscribe. See you soon.